Hey everybody, welcome to our newest installment of our series, all about young people in civic life. Tonight we're going to talk about now and later, how young people participate in civic life. And we're just going to allow our other guests to get on here, and we're going to get started very shortly. Again, my name is Angela Patterson. I'm the head writer and editor at Springtide Research Institute. We're thrilled that you are here. I would love for you guys to introduce yourselves, but before you do that, I know you guys all do such amazing work, and I know that you're often looking to support and connect with emerging generations, just like we do at Springtide. As you introduce yourself, can you briefly explain what your organization does in that mix? That would be great. Anybody, either one of you who wants to start, go on and jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. I can start.
Okay.
My name is Jane Dawson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the co-founders and the current director of policy and endorsements at Maine Youth Power, which is a youth-founded and youth-led 501c3 and C4 organization that started way back after the 2020 election, and has now been building up to 2024 based in rural areas of Maine. So we work with young rural Mainers year round, really investing in grassroots organizing in order to bring a livable future into reality through legislative work, community action, and electoral politics. So we work with folks in their communities year round to bring their work to the state legislature. And then we also work with local candidates to do work to support their campaigns as well.
Awesome.
That's so funny you said 2020 was a long time ago, and it was. Like, doesn't it feel like a lifetime ago?
It feels like a lifetime.
It's true.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I want to say it is so great to meet you, Angela, and you as well, Jane. And thank you so much to Springtide for having us. My name is Alex Edgar, and I use the He series. And I'm the Youth Engagement Manager at Made by Us. And we're a national nonprofit that was started about 5 years ago, when a bunch of people who worked in the museum world realized that young people were just not connecting with museums, but also, as we saw, there's been a massive decline in civic education and civic literacy. So Made by Us was started originally based on the Smithsonian, and now its own independent nonprofit, really focused on kind of a multi-faceted approach of, on one hand, working with institutions, cultural institutions across the country, and helping them understand, like, how do we change and modernize to really reflect and connect with young people, so that they feel, regardless of whether, they are, first generation American, or, their family goes back to the Revolutionary War, that, like, there's pieces of American history that connect with everyone, and stories that are really unique, but often, because of our history, have, often been left in the dark. So we do a lot of work with our partner institutions to help, bring them to light. And then we do a lot of work with young people to help, use these, incredible resources that our partners have, and help do a ton of civic education work, and youth-focused programming, all about how do we get young people not only to, know about, the histories that don't often get told, but also be part of the process of how these, the past and, the present gets told going forward.
That is so cool, because I love the museum angle. I think that's an amazing way to approach it. And I know that your work is probably quite challenging, because everyone is viewing American history differently depending on where they sit in America. So I can only imagine that that has its pitfalls some days, but also its joys, I would imagine.
100%. And I mean, like we're a nonpartisan organization, and our focus, we always say, whether the 4th of July is your favorite holiday, or you don't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, there is stuff throughout our history that should make you should connect with you. And it's about helping people understand their place in American history and how we can build a better future. That is just, makes it so exciting, as you were saying.
Yeah, excellent. It looks like we have a fourth. Hello,
Hi,
sorry.
guys.
Getting back into the live groove, Blake. It took me a second. Blake, we were actually just doing intros.
Okay.
So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your prior experience with young people in activism, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. So I launched Teen Talk Hotline whenever I was 16 years old. So I was super young whenever I launched it. But the organization aims to help inspire and empower youth through initiatives and speaking up about important topics that are most dear to youth. We do this by strategic partnerships with other organizations to help us achieve our mission. So I've been at it for a long time. I'm 24 now. So I really hope that, we can inspire other people to do the same thing, because the more young people that get involved with, topics that are most dear to their hearts, the better.
Absolutely. So wait, Blake, are you our only Gen Zer? I don't want to speak. I don't know. Or do we have other Gen Zers?
I'm Gen Z.
Or is everybody else in the millennial camp?
I think we're all in the Gen Z camp.
All of the Gen Z? Oh wait, so I'm the only one. Oh gosh.
I was like,
okay.
do I look old?
No, everybody here is fresh faced, right?
Oh, yeah.
No, as
And
I've
you're young
recently
at
learned,
heart,
I'm a.
and that's what matters.
Do what? Wait, what did you say?
Oh, I said, and you're young at heart. So
Thank you.
We're all young in this group.
Thank you. I recently learned that I'm a geriatric millennial. Have y'all heard this? I'm not sure that I sit well with that.
No, I don't think that's a thing. I think you can just skip over that one.
Oh, okay,
weird.
Cool. Okay. Thank you for letting me into this space then. I love it. So I'd like to just jump in with a question and hear what y'all have to say about this. And, Springtide has just released a report called Cultivating Care, and it's all about how young people engage in civic life. So I'm very excited. I want to share some of the findings from that report as kind of an anchor point for our discussion today, if that works. As you can imagine, spoiler alert, we heard some feelings of disillusionment with our political system, with civic life in the United States. But we also learned that young people care about a number of issues, deeply care. When we asked what social and political issues they cared about, education topped the list at 55%, followed by abortion and reproductive issues at 50%. And then economy was 49%, climate change at 45%, healthcare at 43%, and gun policy at 40%. Only 6% of the young people that we surveyed reported not caring about anything. So that's not something in the population that we saw. What have y'all heard from young people that you engage with about political and social issues? What do they tell you about how they come to care about certain things?
Okay, I guess I'll go first.
I love it. We're all just waiting.
So I hear a lot of stuff from young people in general, from the variety of different types of work that I do. But essentially, the main thing that it comes back to is young people don't feel seen or heard when leaders are making policies about issues that are most important to them. They care about these issues because it affects their livelihood, including myself. I know that all the topics that you had mentioned are very near and dear to my heart, as well as the rest of the young people. So I guess that's basically what I'm hearing from those that I'm connected with. Now, those on this call may be hearing something completely different, but I'm all ears to what everybody else has to say.
Yeah. I'd be curious.
Yeah. I really appreciate what Blake said about not feeling seen and heard. I think that that's something that's clear, and really reflects sort of a need for young people to be in all facets of policy work, not just as like a single young person, but as a part of the conversation outside of representing their generation. Here at Maine Youth Power, we work a lot with rural young people. So we hear a lot of asks for affordable housing and housing accessibility, and a want for young rural people to stay in the places that they've grown up in, but they don't feel like they have the economic ability to do so. So they have to leave that place in order to succeed. Similarly, in rural places, they often don't feel like they're in community. They don't feel like they're being seen and heard in the rural places that they're inhabiting, and they want to go to find that community. And Maine Youth Power is trying to address some of those needs in the places that they're at in that moment. I also think that we definitely hear from a lot of young people that abortion is top of mind. Maine is working to codify abortion into our constitution, and that's something that youth voters this election are definitely paying attention to when they're going to the polls.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd add from, with my kind of job, I'm kind of bouncing between, talking to young people, but also talking to people who are, very entrenched in these kind of legacy institutions that young people, are, as we all know, at like record highs of not trusting. So I definitely kind of have been seeing a lot of kind of both ends of it. And I definitely agree with a lot of the rest of folks were saying. But I think one thing in particular that stands out is, this idea of, not feeling like they have a seat at the table or that they're being heard. And I think that's a lot of what kind of leads to this, disconnect is that, we have a lot of people that are leading, the institutions, corporations, any sector really, that have been there for years and years. And it's hard for young people to kind of break through into those spaces. And I, can't begin to say the number of times that, I've been the youngest person in a room by decades, and those experiences, I'm sure are universal for, the Gen Zers on the call of like, when you walk into a space and, regardless of other identities, like you know that you're being looked at like, the child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It automatically creates a disconnect and a distancing. And I think that kind of leads into in terms of like, your research into what issues young people care about. I think it's really telling, there's no issue that's really over around 50%. And I think that really shows that like, I think so often Gen Z is looked at as like a monolith. And whenever someone says that to me, I'm like, you haven't spoken to enough Gen Z then. Particularly when we talk about, disconnects between, urban and rural youth, as we were just saying, and, also between college educated and, non-college educated folks in the workforce. Like there are so many disconnects across kind of the Gen Z world. And I think, the folks who are out in the front, a lot more online in these spaces tend to be represented for all young people. And I think that also affects a lot of, again, that kind of disconnect with a lot of people feeling like they don't have a voice or a role in a lot of it.
Yeah. It's wild because that is the thing that we lift up the most, at least we try to in our work, is that no generation is a monolith, especially the youngest ones. Mm-hmm. And I think there's often stereotypes around things they won't care about, what they do and don't want to do or care about or want, all of these sort of things. But that's absolutely not the case. Our data and our research en masse definitely shows that there's diversity, and that there's many young people that care about things very deeply. And this kind of narrative about apathy isn't something that we see in our work for sure. And we're always trying to lift up the diversity of what these young people are thinking, because it's not just your kind of average teenage response, if you will. And so we were encouraged to see what we did see in the diversity of what they cared about. As you can imagine, we asked about social media, and our data showed that 97%, quite literally, of the young people that we talk to report using social at least 1 to 2 hours a day. 47% said that they use it most often to gain knowledge. That was the main reason that they use social. While only about a third of young people on social say that they use these platforms as for news purposes, most encounter political issues there anyway, whether they want to see it or not. 57% reported viewing political information on social media at least a few times a month. So my question to you is, what have young people mentioned to you about social media and how it's informed their beliefs, their positions, or even moved them to any sort of political engagement?
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah, yeah.
I was going to say, with a lot of our work, again, kind of bouncing between a lot of folks who never have touched social media and get confused a lot. I mean, we recently held a kind of a workshop with a bunch of our museum partners in DC, where I'm based. And one of the questions that was written on a sticky note was, what is brat?
I too had that question. Yeah, absolutely.
And how do you explain that to someone who isn't chronically online?
Right.
Right. And we also see, especially as we're my work is a lot of focus on like history and education in that regard. Is that as your study and a lot of study shows, like a ton of young people are actually looking for educational content when they're using their social media, and I think that's where a lot of these political debates about banning TikTok or not having phones in schools and a lot of these other things that neither here nor there, about people can have their individual opinions, but I think a lot of it is that young people often feel like you're trying to take away the way I learn. And the way I connect with the world. And I think that is just so often something that, I've heard and seen from talking to a lot of young people is that like, this has really become a major right that they, not only connect with each other, but also like really, engage with what's going on. Cause, I can tell you, I don't watch the news. I, consume it on some form of social media. I'd say most Gen Z probably do the same.
Yeah. Do you get the sense from the people that you talk to that they have a sense of what might be most credible and what is not? How does the idea of fake news, quote unquote, kind of fall into your experience?
I'd say it kind of depends. I think the way algorithms work, and well, don't bore anyone with details, but like it very much is like once you go down that path, your entire feed is going to become what you're looking for, right? Like the goal is not for your algorithm to present new content to you; it's to present content that you're most likely to engage with. So I think regardless of whether you're in more left spaces, more middle spaces, or more right spaces, the type of content that you'll likely be engaging with online is likely to validate your views and opinions. So I think it's less of like, fake news or not fake news, but it's like based on, each individual's like viewpoint and like their perception and lived experience that really informs the way that the algorithm then presents what could be, seen as factual or, not factual. So I think it's a very difficult kind of distinction to make for so many people.
That's a really great point, Alex, right? Like when we see people that are getting all of their news from social media, they're likely seeing media and news that they're going to agree with. They're not like facing a lot of different perspectives in their feed. So often when I think about and talk about social media and how we use it to organize people, I talk about social media as a first initial step. For generations, right? We've been going to the communities where they are, and we know that Gen Z spends a lot of their time online and a lot of them spend time there. And especially in rural areas and post-COVID, we know that this is one of the only ways that we can connect with folks who are really far away from each other or in some isolated space. And we use social media as a tool to share not only information, but as a way to build a community in these places that is communicating both like from us, but also back to us. So hearing from folks in those spaces about what they need and what they want, because they might not necessarily be able to show up in person. That being said, when we're trying to bring young people into conversations and into news that they might not necessarily see in their feed, social media is really just the initial first step, right? So that's like the one way that we can contact folks and make sure that they're able to come to our offline in-person spaces.
I feel like you guys took everything that I wanted to say. But essentially what I'm gonna say to kind of finish it off is I think the reason why social media has become so large for our generation and younger generations to utilize is the accessibility of it. It's super easy to search stuff, find information that you want that fits what you're looking for over traditional news outlets. Whereas it's a little bit more difficult because traditional news outlets push what they have a story about, whereas the social media is tied to what you're searching. So I feel like it's easier for young people to utilize social media as their source of news because of the accessibility of it. And the change of them utilizing social media over traditional news sources is that it helps them stay more informed about the policies and issues that they deeply care about.
Absolutely. I was surprised by how many of the people that we interviewed talked about actually appreciating social media's ability to get news, or delivering its ability to hear directly from the source. So meaning it doesn't have to be filtered through a news organization that a media entity that I might not really trust. But if somebody goes live from XYZ country and tells me about what's going on the ground there, now I feel like I'm getting a viewpoint I can trust. And so even though, yeah, I don't use social media for news, they would often follow with a story like that. And so it's interesting how young people are conceptualizing what is news and where it comes from and then its validity, and how that will probably end up playing into how they view politics and civics moving forward if social media continues to be the thing that it is right now. It'll be interesting to see if that really sticks. Our data show that young people are more likely to care about civic issues and engage in civic activities if they have more frequent political discussions with friends and trusted adults, A. B, have more positive civic conversations with adults, positive being the word there, finding agreement among trusted adults, friends, and religious leaders, and encountering disagreement safely and civilly with the freedom to learn, question, and grow. So what have you heard young people say they need in order to fully engage in civic life as they either move toward adulthood or get more firmly rooted in adulthood?
I can start first.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, we talked a little bit about this in the first question that you asked, and it's probably a reoccurring theme around how young people need to feel seen, heard, and respected, both as a young person, but outside of that generational identity. So when they're in a community space, they're not just a young person that's there, they're also a community member that's speaking on behalf of their experience and their lived experience that's just as valid as another community member's, regardless of how old that person is. And I think often when people reach out to me and to Maine Youth Power asking like, how can I get like young people involved, or like, I'm a young person and I'm working really hard to get onto this board, we tell them like, run as a slate, bring people with you, bring a team of young people into that space with you so you can all share your experience, and so that you can build power with each other when you face sort of like some of that disagreement. And find trusted allies, right? Find those positive conversations and people who are really going to lift you up in those spaces. We know that young people need trusted support, just like all people, when they're in these spaces and talking about issues that are important to them. And often Maine Youth Power is the person that's there to provide support, or we're just making sure that there are other people in the room that are going to uplift those young people when folks tell them like, you're too young, sit down. We know that like people want to listen to young people, and we want to make sure that the folks who are up there sharing their experiences feel listened to. And I think ultimately they want their basic needs met, right? And like in order to find comfort and feel confident enough to speak in all of these spaces and to have political discussions with friends and trusted adults, they want to make sure that like they're feeling comfortable in those spaces and they're feeling like their basic needs are met.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know we heard over and over again, I will gauge whether or not I feel it's safe to even start any sort of political or civic conversation with a person. And if I even get a little bit of vibe that this might not be a safe space, then I'm leaning back. Especially
Absolutely.
if it's, I mean, it's like, especially if it's somebody I don't know that well anyway.
Yeah.
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 It was interesting to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so many things are in my mind right now from what both of you just said. So I'll try to pull them together.
Yeah.
I think with Angela, with what you just said about, you know, wanting to feel safe in a conversation, you know, I think there's always striking this balance, right, between, you know, how can we do dialogue, right? You know, I think we can all agree, like, you know, we need to be able to talk to each other. But, you know, I think that often comes as something that's more important than the understanding that, like, you can't ask someone to be in a conversation with someone respectfully if you do not, like, agree or support some aspect of their identity, or you don't think that they have the right to exist as who they are. And I, you know, regardless of who I'm talking to, I always like say, like, you know, it doesn't matter the issue. You know, if you have a fundamental like disconnect in terms of, you know, respecting their humanness and you know, some aspect of their identity, you know, there are not going to be civil conversations possible, because, you know, I think before we're anything, we're, you know, our human selves, you know, whatever our identities are. So I think that's like one thing. This is so important to young people in particular. I think it's, you know, we've been a lot better than I think previous generations at being like, I'm not going to take this. I'm going to tap out. And then one thing I think that Jane mentioned earlier about kind of, you know, this idea of, you know, kind of youth bringing expertise as all the time whenever we're, you know, bringing young people in the conversations, you know, with museums or other cultural institutions, we make, you know, both sides review this like document about intergenerational dialogue. And one of the first things that I think is so important is we always say, these young people are not just experts because they're young. You know, they are not here just because you need to talk to a young person. And, you know, they're not replaceable by other young people.
Yes.
You know, that like youth power, you know, expertise, you know, I always say, like, you know, your lived experience as a young person are just as important as someone who spent, you know, 10 years on a PhD working on it, right? Because, you know,
absolutely,
you're both coming with so much knowledge and understanding about what you know. But, you know, I think it's helpful trying to get particularly, you know, older generations, you know, these more like institutional places to understand that, like, it's not just, you know, a youth advisory council, you know, it's young people part of the decision-making process. And I think that is such an important thing that we see in terms of, like, you know, kind of how do we get young people to feel part of it, is that, you know, it's not just saying, like, we brought a young person, yay, like gold star.
Yeah.
Because I promise, I've been in a lot of those situations.
Yes.
It's about, you know, making young people, you know, part of the system, part of the process, feel that they're being valued for their time and energy and expertise. Because I think that is really the way. And then as was also mentioned, like once you get that first young person or first couple young people in the door, so much of it is you bring your community with you. So when you feel comfortable in a space, you're so much more likely to invite other of your peers. And I think that also plays a massive role there.
Yeah. Tokenization is a real thing. And we want to, I know in our work, we tried really hard to avoid that. And I'm sure in y'all's work, you do as well, because it is very easy for older adults to be like, well, we just have this representative young person. Do we need to talk to more? I mean,
they
it's like, actually, yes.
Speak for Gen Z. They know everything.
Right. Well, just like they wouldn't want somebody to assume that they represent all boomers or all Gen Xers. You know what I mean? Like, I found that older adults are receptive when you reframe it, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's probably accurate. I want to back up to something that you said, Alex, because I think it's really important about deal breakers and about when we were interviewing young people for this report, we asked them, so, if you're in disagreement, what's the one thing that it's like, oh, no, this is where we disagree. Okay, we hang it up. This is it. And I was surprised by how few there really were. But one thing that we heard over and over again was this issue of humanity and personhood. If we're disagreeing about somebody's humanity, that's a no-go. It's not happening. And that was in some ways you might see one side of the political spectrum embodying that view a little bit more than others, but we were surprised by how far it was kind of spread across the continuum. And so that might be something that Gen Z just ends up really embodying, is this idea of allowing people to be their authentic selves and allowing people to live into their personhood, and that not being on the table is somewhere where we're going to try to meet in the middle, because that's not a place where we meet in the middle, right? Blake, what are your thoughts?
I guess I kind of have a different answer than what everybody else is mentioning. I feel like what I'm hearing from young people is we need more of our generation in leadership positions to make policy and to pass those policies, because they feel a sense of responsibility to take pride in the issues that are most dear to them. And the older generations just aren't doing what young people need them to do. So by more young people getting involved in politics to pass the issues that are most dear to them, more young people would also feel more inclined to stay engaged within politics in general. So that's kind of my take on that question.
Do you get the sense, and this is for any of you, Blake or otherwise, do you get the sense that if young people continue to experience that cycle that you just talked about, we need a need met, our politicians aren't getting it done, do you think that they're going to stay in the game? Or do you think that they will get disillusioned to the point that they opt out? Or do we have some hopeless optimists here that they're going to keep on plugging until they get what they want?
I can agree with all points that you mentioned, but I feel like Gen Z, we have such the grit and determination to get stuff done. So I don't really think our generation would be the type of generation to give up. I just think we're going to keep trying until we achieve what we want to achieve.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, Angela, like the question is like, do we continue to fight against the climate change and the climate crisis, or do we just like let that one go by? Right? I think
it sounds kind of absurd, but yes, essentially that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, like, although it might be really difficult in some situations for young people to get elected into office, they also definitely understand the stakes. And the stakes are really, really high. And so I think that is definitely a driving force, not just for individuals who are looking to get elected, but for all communities and movements who are excited to put forward candidates and to continue to get folks into policymaking positions.
I would say I definitely agree with like the conclusion that both of y'all came to, but I do, at least from a lot of my experience, and I think kind of like connecting a lot of the things we've been talking about today, is that I don't think that Gen Z is at all like going to disengage entirely from our systems, right? At the end of the day, you know, I think a lot of us understand, you know, you got to kind of participate in order to, you know, push to make that change. But I also think, you know, as we initially talked about, right, in terms of, you know, youth disillusionment with systems, just because they're not engaged in, you know, these traditional systems like religion or, you know, organized groups like Rotary or, you know, Kiwanis, you know, that doesn't mean that young people aren't finding community. And that community is often online. And I think, you know, even going back to, you know, this kind of idea of like, you know, how do we do dialogue when we have these fundamental differences, right? It's that Gen Z in particular, you know, especially because of our online spaces, like we've been brought up in a world where any belief you have, you can find someone else who shares it. And, you know, for better or for worse, you know, we're able to, you know, enter the digital realm and find community around absolutely anything that means something to us. And I think because of that, you know, there's often, you know, both more incentive to participate, right? Because you have other people who are, you know, you're kind of standing by your side and, you know, pushing you forward. But, you know, on the other hand, in other scenarios, it's also, you know, really easy to like, you'll feel, you know, we just mentioned climate change, like there's a lot of people who care a ton about climate change. But because of the feeling of, you know, a lack of hope in climate doomism, there's also a lot of people that say, you know what, like it's me against big oil, and I don't think I can beat big oil. So, you know, I'm going to sit here and, you know, I love nature. I'm going to go, you know, work in my local community garden, or I'm going to go, you know, volunteer, you know, with National Park Service, right? So I don't think it's a complete, like, we're going to, you know, completely disengage. But I do think, you know, oftentimes Gen Z is like, okay, you know, this is something I care about. Here are the people that care about it. What's like the smaller level thing that I can be doing instead of just, you know, big level politics. It's, you know, I think a lot of Gen Z really focuses on, you know, in their communities, whether virtual or in person, how do you make those kind of positive changes?
And I love the hyper local. And I do wonder if that will be something that Gen Z continues to focus on, only because they literally have the world at their fingertips in a device all day long, right? And so the opposite of that is how can I impact the world immediately, quite literally, around me? And so it'll be interesting to see if young people can continue to lean into space that way, or if they continue to think macro, because there are strength in numbers like you were talking about. If I'm into something, I can find 5 other people who also think exactly or feel strongly about it as I do. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that shakes out. So you've already answered this final question that I have for you in some ways, but I want to throw it out there just to see if perhaps you have additional thoughts. What do you want people to understand, particularly older folk, or even practical tips to implement when it comes to supporting young people as they form their political identities and engage in civic life? If I could get a one takeaway that you haven't mentioned yet from each of you, that would be awesome.
I can start, and I'll say one thing I already said, and then I'll
Go
say
for it. And I want you to reiterate it. We need to hear it again.
So I think we at Maine Youth Power get this question a lot. And often they're like, I have, you know, I'm on my city council. I want more people to come. I want more young people to come. What can I do? And we say, bring a group. Bring more than one person. Don't just bring your neighbor and all of their friends. Because if you want folks to really be engaged in this conversation, you need to make sure that there are more than just you in that space that support them. So share that you support them, and then bring others into that space so they know that they have some people in the crowd that are there, and then they can sort of like build their political identity in that space, knowing that they're not just going to be like put down, shut down. and told that they're not supposed to be there. I think often we also at Maine Youth Power believe that like bringing new young people into spaces that sort of cover all spectrums of what does it mean to engage in civic life. So giving them all of the tools to engage, not just saying like, this is your piece of the pie to learn about, and we'll like do all the other parts to make sure you feel supported, but say like, hey, this is the whole process that we have going on, and you can take part in any part of this that you feel like best reflects what you want to do. And all of these are valid and exciting ways that you can engage civically and engage politically. And also, that's important because I'm not going to be a young person forever, but I really want Maine Youth Power to stay there longer than I am. And I want to make sure that folks feel like they can take this whole thing that we've got going on and keep on pulling that as they grow up and build into that space.
I love that. Supporting a sense of agency. Perfect, perfect. Okay, love it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd say, I love that answer so much. Is kind of connecting to something we were talking about earlier, and it's so much this idea that like as an older generation, you are really the only people that can pass the torch, but that can also serve as the teachers and mentors of the future, right? And I think it's so easy, especially in industries that you might be so focused on how do I work my way to the top, to forget about all these young people that are coming into it and how are eager to learn, eager to participate in civic society and our culture and whatever it may be, and so often it is that one person who reaches out their hand and says, hey, like, can I explain this to you? Or, how can I help? And I know personally, like, I can trace, the work I do today back to, one of my teachers who gave me the first opportunity to be involved in something civic, in a way that I had never seen myself as someone who is interested in civic engagement. So I think, having those trusted messengers and those trusted adults in your life are so important. And my one thing for young people is, I mean, by us, I kind of have to say this, like, go to a museum, because there is
Yes.
so much about our civic life, our culture, what's going on in politics today that is just reflected in our past, right? And there's so much we can learn by not only, going to school and going to history class, but seeking out the stories that are often left out of our history classes, particularly in some states across the country, and really, like, again, it might be a bit biased, but I think, museums are the perfect place to go to not only kind of build a civic community, but also, learn so much more about either your local community, a different culture, a different lived experience that other than yours. I think that really helps also in bridging the gap with older generations who might have lived through those things that you're learning about.
Oh, love that. Search for the untold stories. Love it. Love it. Blake?
First of all, I love that answer because I was gonna mention something along the lines of, the older generations need to pass a torch to the younger generations, and they really need to understand what issues everybody deeply cares about, and I feel like older generations right now, they're not asking young people, oh, how can I be of better assistance to support your generation with those types of issues that you care so deeply about? That conversation isn't being made by the older generations. So I just think that it's time to pass the torch, so that way young people can have a sense of belonging within civics and, engage more within that spectrum.
I love it. Yes. Passing of the torch happens so many ways and in so many different spaces. And I love that each of you are contributing to how that is happening. It's been an honor to share this space with you tonight and to hear your wisdom on this topic. Thank you for being in conversation with me. If for those of you who are watching and you're interested in finding more about Springtide Research Institute, you can check us out at Springtide Research endorsements.org. Our newest report, Cultivating Care, is on sale now and is for the taking. I thank you so much, and it was great to talk to you.
Thank you
Take
so much
care
for
now.
having us.
Thank you so
No
much. It was
problem.
great to meet you all. Have a good night.
Absolutely.
Everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.